Courtney, I would like to start at the beginning of everything. You and your now ex-husband, Zach Smith, met at Kentucky in college. You got married in June of 2008 when he was a graduate assistant for Urban Meyer at Florida. When did the alleged abuse begin?
That was in 2009, the Gainesville incident that I'm sure you're aware of. That was actually the first time that he's ever been physically violent with me.
So there was a police report on that incident. Can you tell me what happened that night?
We were at a get-together at Coach Meiers' house. They always had a big party, kind of get-together for all the coaches' families before, kind of as a farewell, have a good summer before everybody went on their little break. I was pregnant, wasn't feeling very well. I went home. Zach decided he was going to go out with some friends, which was fine, but ended up coming home about 3 o'clock in the morning, which turned into the night of our anniversary. I guess you would say the morning of our anniversary, our 1-year anniversary. And he came home, and he came home with a coworker, and had asked if I could have that coworker sleep on the couch, and obviously I was not happy with that. There was an argument between all three of us. I drove the coworker home and came home, and I was obviously very unhappy with him. He was in my bed. I wanted him out of the bed. I was beside myself. Wanted him to sleep on the couch, and things just escalated from there. And he literally picked me up by my shirt and threw me up against the wall.
You called the police.
Yeah.
But ultimately, after this incident, you decided not to press charges and you decided to stay with them. Can you walk me through each of those decisions and how you came to them?
The ultimate decision to not drop the charges was pressured. I was pressured by his family and Urban Meyer's attorney. He actually wasn't just Urban's attorney. He was the attorney that represented any of the players that needed representation. He also was appointed to represent Zach. I was basically told, if you don't drop the charges, he's never going to coach again. And he's never hit you before. He was drinking. He's probably never going to do it again. Maybe we should think about giving him a second chance. I said I would think about it. Then his mom and his grandfather, Earlbers, drove down from Ohio all the way to Gainesville and had a long talk with me, and I ultimately, 8 days later, decided to drop the charges. I truly believed he would never do it again.
So then you and Zach stay together. You eventually moved to Columbus in 2012 when he gets hired on Urban Meyer's staff at Ohio State. What's the state of your marriage at that point, 3 years after that incident in 2009?
When we got here, everything went completely out of control. And that is because I truly believe his life was spiraling out of control. He was under a lot of pressure. I don't think he was really ready to take on the job. I think he was pressured by family, and I would say myself too, yeah, we want to be at Ohio State, but we're not thinking about the kind of pressure that he was probably going to be feeling at the time. He was stressed out a lot, and I felt like it was out of control, his life, and he felt I was really the only thing left he could control. And I started noticing some things I had never noticed about him and his lifestyle. He was living a very toxic lifestyle, and every time I would question him, that's when he became physically abusive again.
The police were called to your home in 2015. Can you tell me about that incident?
We were separated at the time. I thought leaving him, the abuse would end. I thought it would be my way out. However, it did not end. It turned into different kinds of abuse. That 2015 incident was the last time he ever laid his hands on me. He came to my home. He wasn't happy. We got into an argument. He decided he wanted to take my son. It wasn't his night, his parenting night. And I obviously fought back, not physically, but no, you're not going to take him. It's my night. There needs to be boundaries. And when I stood up to him, he didn't like it, and he took me and shoved me up against the wall with his hands around my neck, something he did very often. My daughter was clinging to my leg, and He obviously, it registered with him what he was doing, so he took my son and left, and I called the police.
Now, you've mentioned your children several times, so I have to ask, were you ever worried that he would harm your children?
No, I really didn't think he would ever hurt them. I was more worried about the fact of, the damage he was going to do to them as far as setting an example and my children learning from his behavior. And as my children started getting older, there's specific incidences where I literally thought to myself, I have to get out of this or my son is going to be just like him. And I cannot live with myself knowing my two children that I have spent, their whole lives raising, and they're my world. My life has revolved around them. And I couldn't live with the fact that they were living in that environment. I had to get them out.
The incident in 2015 where you called the police, you said he left with your son. Why was he never charged?
I don't know what happened. I felt and I was told they had more than enough evidence to charge him with domestic violence. It's very frustrating, and I felt very defeated because after a year of waiting and, interviews from the police and, just one thing after another with Zach during that time, obviously he knew he was under investigation, so he wasn't very happy. So I had to go through a lot during that with him, and nothing came out of it. And it was one of the worst things I've ever had to deal with.
After the years of the abuse that you've told me about, what finally triggered your decision to move out and to get a divorce?
Well, number one, my children. Obviously, I feel that I need to set an example for them. Two, I had enough. It was out of control to the point that he picked me up by my neck and threw me down on the ground in our bathroom and screamed at me, "Look what you've turned me into." When it gets to that point, you realize your life is at stake. And I had never, ever imagined it would get to that point. And it was time. It was time to go. It was time.
Now, as you said, during the time in Columbus, things really escalated until the point that you were able to move out. Who did you talk to, if anyone, about all of this?
All the coaches' wives were like family to me. I didn't go into details of the abuse. It was more, they knew that we were in a toxic marriage. They knew there was a lot of arguing. They knew, Zach was not being faithful. He was part of the toxic lifestyle. There were a lot of incidences that I was starting to learn about. Other women were contacting me while we were married and, trying to tell me, what was going on. And I felt like with the abuse and then to have to deal with that, it was so, and he manipulated me. He was very controlling. He controlled our finances and, isolated me. So I talked a lot about those types of things with the wives, and they were great support. Some of the wives didn't know about a couple of incidences, such as after a recruiting dinner, he busted out my front windshield of my car. We were pulling out of the valet after a recruiting dinner. He was upset because my mom had called while we were at the dinner. She had my daughter, who was just a newborn. My daughter wasn't feeling well. And I took the call and came back, and he was angry, asked, can I ever let it go? Can I ever stop being a mom just enough to get through a recruiting dinner? And obviously, I was driving home. I was the one he was in the passenger seat when we pulled out of the valet. And at the restaurant, he was angry and busted out the windshield, and there were a few people that saw it. He also took a golf club to the side of my car, told me that should teach me. I'll learn my lesson. Then took my phone from me. Obviously, at this point, I am losing my mind. I'm angry. Like anybody would be angry and yelling and feeling like, how could you take a golf club to my car? And he knew I was mad, and he was afraid. I think he was afraid I was going to call the police, so he snatched my phone, and I tried to get that phone back, and he wouldn't give it back for fear that I would call the police. He did that numerous times. Anytime he would lay his hands on me, he would try to take the phone, or he would take off and leave and go sleep at the football office. And there were many threats that if I ever came forward or I went to the media with any of this and he lost his job, he would take my kids and he would hurt me. And I would pay for it. And he has said if it ever happens, he will take everyone down with him too. That's another reason why I didn't come forward. There are so many people's lives in jeopardy.
Did you feel comfortable telling, as you said, your support system about these incidents?
Like I said, I felt comfortable telling some of them about the incidences, as I just explained, the car, that kind of thing, the other issues we were having. I did not feel comfortable telling them about the actual physical abuse at that time, because I was afraid that they would force me to do something about it. And at that time, I was scared. I did tell my parents. I told his parents as well. I remember specifically texting pictures to my mom, my dad, his dad, like begging for help, like, this has to stop. This isn't normal. I can't do this anymore. And I was told, don't call the police. If you call the police, he's going to get arrested. It's going to go to the media. He's going to lose his job. What are you and the kids going to do? Mm-hmm. And I had been a stay-at-home mom for a while, so it was very scary, and you think, like, we went through therapy again. We did everything we could. And like, you would, in my mind, and anyone who's been abused, you really do think you can change them. You think, well, if I do something different, he'll change. And it's not the case. They don't change.
So to be clear, none of the coaches' wives knew about the physical abuse?
At that time, they did not. In 2015, I came forward with it. I told Shelley. I sent her some pictures. I spoke to her on the phone. And that was because at that point, we were legally separated. And enough is enough. If I leave the marriage, I'm hoping this is going to stop. This has to stop. And that was my final cry for help. It's time. You guys need to know. This man needs help. And I need to be protected. So I did tell them.
And how did they and Shelley respond when you told them this? How did those conversations go?
Very sympathetic, supportive, caring. Why didn't you do something about this before, was her first question. And I explained to her, just as I did to you, it's scary. People who are being abused don't just pick up and leave right away. It takes a long time and a lot of courage. And they manipulate you, the abuser. They make you feel like it's your fault. And they demean you, and they put you down to the point that you have no self-esteem, and you're scared. And there's a reason why they do that. Shelley she said she was going to have to tell Urban. She was going to have to tell Urban. I said, that's fine. You should tell Urban. We can't have somebody like this coaching young men. He's supposed to be a mentor for young men. I gave him so many chances. And if he's doing this to somebody he supposedly loved, and in front of, some of the incidences were in front of our children, like, that takes it to a whole nother level. That's just not somebody that I personally, as a mother, would want coaching my son. Or, I wouldn't put my children in the hands of anybody like that.
Did she ever come back to you and tell you that she did tell Urban?
She did not. She did not. She would reach out to me, ask me how I'm doing, tell me she was worried, that if I needed anything, she was there, asked me if I had gotten a protective order. At that time, I was told if I filed for a civil protection order, that if I was not granted the order, that it could be used against me, possibly in domestic court by Zach. And I didn't want to take that chance of losing my children. I couldn't do that. So I knew I needed to be protected at the time, but I will say that that was the last time he ever put his hands on me. He just began other tactics to try to, mental, verbal, emotional, just psychological abuse, financially drained me. I paid for the entire divorce. He had people higher ups that were helping him, and he knew eventually I was going to run out of money and I wouldn't be able to fight. So I knew it wasn't worth the risk because I cannot lose my children. They're my life. And I wasn't going to have the money to fight him in court.
With Shelley Meyer being aware of everything that was going on and saying that she was going to have to tell Urban, do you think that he knows about all of this?
I believe he does.
Did he ever directly talk to you about what was going on in your marriage or between you and Zach?
Not the abuse. He never spoke to me about the physical abuse, but he had, made a couple comments to me, and we had a couple conversations, very brief. How are you guys doing? Everything okay? And, of course, we're married, and I'm trying to get through this. I'm trying to, hope that he's going to change. I'm not ready to leave yet. So, of course, during that time after the national championship, when we won that game, we were in the airport on our way. We were at the airport. We had just landed back in Columbus, and he asked me how we were doing. And I said, we're all right, because at the time, what was I going to say at that time? I wasn't ready to come forward with the abuse. I was scared.
How would you respond to your ex-husband's attorney claiming that you were just trying to ruin his career by doing this?
Well, I think that's silly, because if that's what I was trying to do, I would have done that 3 years ago. When I filed for divorce, I would have done that. The whole investigation was going on at the time. I had absolutely no reason why I couldn't have come forward with my story then. It would have ruined his career. I would get absolutely nothing out of that. I didn't want this to happen, but because he continued to not listen to the authorities, believe he's above the law, and not follow orders that were given to him by authorities and within our shared parenting plan and divorce decree, he's now suffering the consequences of those actions. He's done this to himself. I am not ruining his career. He put himself in this situation. He could have changed. He knew what he was doing was wrong, and he didn't change. He did this. I have nothing to do with this.
Courtney, do you believe Urban Meyer should remain the head football coach at Ohio State?
That's a tough question. When somebody is crying out for help, I believe the coach, along with the coach's wife, have a duty. They have a duty to do something to help. Instead of worrying about winning games, or instead of worrying about who his mentor is and who his family is and trying to protect that, somebody's safety and the safety of their children and that the environment that they're in needs to be more important. And I hope that in the future, he never, ever, ever turns his head away again. I hope that, I know Shelley did everything she could. I know she did. I firmly believe that, at least. I can say she was very supportive, and she never made me feel uncomfortable. She never made me feel like I was a threat to her and Urban by telling her these things. Never. However, I do believe he knew, and instead he chose to help the abuser, enable the abuser, and believe whatever stories Zach was telling everybody. He of course, he's gonna tell everybody I'm crazy and I'm making this up. That's not the case. And no one from the university came to me and asked me my side of the story. They knew there was an investigation going on, and not once did anyone call me and ask me what happened. That's a problem. It needs to change.